Hi, welcome to the Interaxis channel and Interaxis.io. We're going to keep talking about building blocks, some of the building blocks of cryptocurrency, blockchain, decentralized finance, digital assets that we continue to try to build on here. And in this case, we're going to talk about governance. Governance is a really big one that's come up recently within DeFi and within blockchain, but it's one that's actually goes all the way back to the beginning of Bitcoin. And governance is such a huge feature here and a huge block that we really need to talk about it. And quite honestly, it might take a couple videos to fully get through governance. But we want to remind you first, go ahead and subscribe to the channel here because we keep adding more content, adding more videos. We try to put these themes together like the building blocks and the lending and the real world assets and everything. So please try to subscribe to the channel, give us comments below, tell us what you think, tell us if there's anything else you want us to talk about, and we'll try to hit those topics as well. So going back to governance, why is it so important? We got to take a step back to what we already had in place in the world of governance. When I talk about governance, it could go anywhere from nonprofit organizations to private companies to public companies to government to actual countries and government and the financial infrastructure and everything. There's so many issues at play when it comes to governance and our ability to have and exercise some sort of influence, and why that's important. So if we take a step back, governance, let's say in public companies. So if I own stock in a public company, what does that level of governance look like? What role do I have, or what abilities do I have? Well, the way the public companies work is, let's say I have stock in Apple and I have one share. Well, I can go vote that one share. That's part of the point of owning stock, is I actually own a piece of the company. And what is that piece of the company? It gives me the ability to vote as a stockholder. It also gives me the ability to piece, based on how many shares I own versus how many shares outstanding, a piece of the profits of the company. Now, what happens is I get to vote, and my vote is generally for people on the board of directors. Okay, so that's kind of what I get to do. Now, I can go to the shareholders meetings and I can voice displeasure or whatever else, but really I'm not voting on the day-to-day operations of the company. I am voting on the board of directors. Okay, the board of directors then, they vote, okay, so that they have some voting ability, and they vote on the management of the managers. And when I say managers, I don't mean just mid-level management. I mean the CEO, technically the CEO, the president, the VPs, all of that. They technically vote on that. Now, a lot of times in reality, the CEO is also the chairman of the board, especially if it's a founder. So they kind of have dual roles. Now, what will happen is early investors, early venture capital type investors, early investors, or investors that own quite a few shares will get some seats on the board, so they can help direct who the president, CEO, all of that is, and therefore they can help direct. But what the management does is they run day-to-day operations. They decide how the company is going to run. The management does that. So they run the company day-to-day. There's no idea that if I own one share of Apple, that I actually get a say in the day-to-day operations. It goes through several iterations, several levels before it gets here. And part of the reason that's done is it's just more efficient. These people are put in place because they're probably really good at their job of running the day-to-day operations of Apple. I would not be very good, as much as I can complain about things potentially on my phone or my computer or whatever. I'm probably not very good at running a company like Apple. Therefore, I want to own shares because maybe I want to have a vote. Now, maybe I'm, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, and I want to own millions and millions of shares, and therefore I can actually have a say. I can have much more of a say. I can maybe get enough votes to put someone on the board of directors that will help influence who this management is. Maybe I don't like the CEO, and I have enough shares that we can then try to vote on on some new board members that will get rid of the CEO or appoint a new CEO or make some changes. Maybe, as in the past, Apple didn't declare that they didn't pay any dividends, right? Dividends are how we participate in the profit of companies. Maybe at some point Apple didn't pay dividends, and we as activist shareholders say, look, you're sitting on wads of cash, why don't you pay us some dividends in return for holding your stock, because that would actually help the value of the stock. What else are you going to do with your money? We might, enough of us get together, we vote on some directors that would then vote on whether or not they declare dividends, right? So we can have that type of effect, but I don't get to vote on whether or not profits of the company flow through to me as a shareholder. There are different levels. So that's a little bit about how the actual equity in public companies works. Now, if it's private companies, the difference is you might only have a few shareholders, and it's kind of spelled out in the operating agreement what kind of voting ability you have, and you can have shares with voting rights and shares that don't have voting rights. So I might own 1% of a private company, but 100%, but all of the voting shares, right? So I get to actually decide, make changes to the company, but I don't get to participate in the profits as much. And we see that a lot in estate planning cases where family members, like the patriarch or the person who started the business, is passing it to the kids, but wants to maintain a lot of the decision-making ability, but for valuation purposes, for tax purposes, actually passing on the profit-generating part, the profitability of the company to heirs. So we see that in private companies. So that's a bit about how governance might work in public companies, because what we see a lot in crypto and especially DeFi is these comparisons to the public markets. Okay, so in the public markets, that's just a little bit what you get in governance and voting. And again, we're going back to explain some of this. So another topic I want to discuss in relation to governance goes all the way, again, back to Bitcoin. Okay, and the thing about Bitcoin is we always say there's no Bitcoin company, there's no 800 number to call. We talk about how there can only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. People go, well, what if there's a vote to change that? There's not really a vote to change it. With Bitcoin, you've outsourced most of the decision making to code, right? The code decides, the code has determined when there's a halving event. The code has determined what the block rewards are and how many there will ever be, and how the block size and such. Now, if at some point the developers, so over here you have the Bitcoin, the developers who get together and decide on a lot of things, and they might decide they want to change the code a little bit. So we had this with the SegWit issue, when we tried to take out the signature, part of the block, take out part of the previous hash from the block, so it increased the block size, so you increase transaction speed. All this had happened with the governance of Bitcoin, but what happens is the developers have to get together and decide those things on the Bitcoin code, and then they have to implement those changes. Now, in the case of Bitcoin, especially, and other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin that don't really have the ability to change quite a bit of the code significantly, when there are big changes that want to be made, if there's a group of devs that want to make changes, but many of them say, look, if we make those changes, we're not staying true to what Bitcoin was, we're going to hurt the value, whatever it is, then you have to fork. They have to decide to fork the code. So some of these developers that want these changes go, fine, we're going to fork the code. That's how we got Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin and some of these others that are forks of the Bitcoin code, where if you go back, you have the Bitcoin code going along. They decided they want to make a change, and here you have Bitcoin continuing to go, and here you have Bitcoin Cash. Right, which the idea is, faster transaction speeds, more, larger block size, those kinds of things. Obviously, a lot lower value than Bitcoin, but you can trace it back and go back to the original Bitcoin code to actually within the blockchain. So if you go far enough back in this chain, you can see where the fork actually happens. So from a governance standpoint, the developers have to get together and go, okay, we're going to fork this code. We're going to take it in a different direction. We're going to call it something different. Anyone who holds it here, we're going to decide if we're going to airdrop or issue them, an equal number of tokens for this new chain that we're offering. Okay, so that's a little bit about the governance of Bitcoin. Now, because of that, you have other tokens, other chains, other cryptocurrencies that have been developed that have governance mechanisms built into them. Some of them specifically so they don't have forks. So one example I'll give, and we have a whole video about Tezos, but one example is Tezos has a governance structure that says there can be enough votes using the XDZ token, using the Tezos token. Those that are baking and developing, but those that are baking can bring up an issue that they can not summon, but they can write an issue, write something that they want to discuss, some governance proposal. They can propose something, and it has to go through certain iterations. Certain other bakers and delegators and such have to vote on it, and they use their tokens to vote on it, and they might vote to change the code for the better. And enough of it, there's certain requirements, and if you go back to our video, you'll see what those are. But there are certain requirements that have to be met for changes to happen. And in that case, you have the Tezos chain, and if a change happens here, because the voting that the code put in place, so the code put in place, not necessarily this is how we're going to keep going all the time, no matter what, unless there's a fork. What the code of Tezos says is we can vote and make changes to the code, and it just keeps going on the same chain. We don't have to fork the chain in order to continue to go, because we built governance actually into the chain. Okay, so governance is in here, rather than saying, look, if you want to make a change, you have to create a new blockchain. Okay, Tezos isn't the only one, it's just one that I bring up. Because now, when you start decentralizing, you have more issues with governance. Because the whole idea is we don't want one single company or one entity or one individual to have so much power that they can make those changes because it influences so many people, because then it wouldn't be decentralized anymore. And we want that decentralization, and we want the decentralization in terms of the governance, because ideally what you're going to have is enough people that don't have voting. So if I go back to Tezos, right, there are enough people, enough bakers all over here, and none of them are hopefully going to have so much voting power that they can implement something that is only in their best interest. They want to propose and then vote on and implement things that are in everyone's best interest, and they have to talk about why it's in everybody's best interest. There's a discussion period within the Tezos chain that says, look, we're humans, and we actually have to discuss this and figure out why this is better. So Tezos has this governance structure that basically says we're going to discuss these things, and hopefully no one here has so much voting power that they can actually change things that's only for their good. Because if this person had like 51%, I'm just giving an example, or 51 or like 75% of the tokens, they might be able to vote on things that are only in their best interest. And that's not that's not decentralization anymore. That's not helping everybody. That's not creating a decentralized financial ecosystem. So that's some of the governance that has come up, and the idea that when we started with Bitcoin and the code governed it, and the idea was basically, one, it was an experiment. Let's see what happens. And eventually people said, look, this is taking off. We really like this. We want faster block times, or we need this to move faster. We need to fit more data within every block because we've just outgrown what the code is, but the Bitcoin code is not really able to change like that, so you have to fork it. So other chains have come along and say, okay, we can kind of solve that problem within our chain and say our code gives us the ability for governance within the token structure that says those that hold tokens are able to vote. Here's how it works, and we're actually going to lay out like the Constitution. Here's the Constitution of how our token works, and that's what this code is like. That's what the governance is like. It's a lot like a constitution, like the U.S. Constitution. It sits out there, and everything has to be compared to it. Okay, everything has to be compared to the Constitution. Is this legal? Is this constitutional? And if it's not, it doesn't get to move forward. Okay, and the idea is not that we vote on a board of directors who then votes on management, who then gets to decide if it works. It's everyone who has a token essentially gets to vote. Now, I might delegate my tokens to others, partially for the rewards, but partially because I want to delegate it to others so that they can make that decision, because I think that they're going to make the decision in terms of what's in the best interest. And the fact that those tokens are so dispersed, you don't have anyone with all the central power. All right, so that I'm going to stop there, because that's a little bit just about chain governance. We went back and talked about public company governance. We moved forward to talk a little bit about Bitcoin and how that's progressed into chains like Tezos. There are others that tackle governance in other ways. Chains like Algorand, for instance, tackles governance in different ways with the idea of looking at what is best for the chain, best for the ecosystem and the network, and utilizing the tokens to make decisions. So I'm going to stop for right there and let this sink in a little bit. Hope you enjoyed this. We have another lesson, another video coming on governance. I didn't want to pack too much into one because I want people to watch it, absorb, and then move on to the next one. So that's a little bit about governance. Had to take a step back into public companies and how those work. Ironically, that level of government's that representative government, which I'll actually talk a little bit about. I'll step back. I'm going all over the place. I apologize, but we, of course, in the U.S. kind of have a representative government, which says I have my vote. Right, I live in Houston, Texas. Right, I might vote on a senator from Texas. Well, I actually get to vote on 2 senators from Texas, and then I vote on my rep for the House based on my district. Now, my goal is I want people who are going to represent what I think is best for the country. But look, I'm voting on them to go up to Washington and vote on what they think is best for the country. So I'm electing people to go do the day-to-day operate, to go manage, right? To go be the management of the country. That's what I'm electing. I generally don't get to we don't get to vote on too many federal laws. These people were deciding that they get to go pass the laws. We don't get to decide on too many federal laws. We get to decide on things like constitutional amendments, right? And it takes a long time to get a constitutional amendment all the way through to the point where we get to vote on it. We get to vote on things like the president, okay? And again, we're trying to elect people who we think are good at running the country, at making those laws and making those decisions and keeping track of our armies and our military and negotiating with other countries and such, and keeping the peace here at home. That's what we want to elect, those people to do that, because we don't want to get mired and bogged down in the day-to-day. We're not capable. And then those people set forth laws, and they set forth orders and decisions on what is best for the government or what is best for the country. And then, of course, there are people who work for the government that go do what these people have said. This is what you do. This is how you have to run the country day to day. So that's our goal. Now, I probably vote for people who ideally share my values, share my ideas on some of the issues, because I want them to take those to Washington and enact those laws and those rules. But when it comes down to it, ideally, the point is I want to elect people that can run the country, because I don't have time to do it. I got other stuff to do, and I just want them to run the country in a way that I feel like they can do what is best for the country. So that's a little bit about how our government works, which I know most people know that and have studied that, but we have to talk about it as we move forward and talk about how blockchains and crypto and DeFi are working with governance, because the whole point of decentralized finance is that, remember, to disintermediate, to take out some of the fees and friction, and to do what we want to do, kind of not necessarily around, but not not always waiting for government and banks and intermediaries like that, not always going based on what they do, but we as a community are going to decide. That's the point of a decentralized system. We're taking the centralization out of it. And can we, by virtue of blockchain, crypto, DeFi, actually be able to vote on some of these day-to-day operations and do so in an efficient way? So I'm going to end right there. Even though I said I was going to end 5 minutes ago, I'm going to end here. We're going to have another video, another lesson about governance, but that's a bit about governance. Please subscribe to the channel. We hope you enjoyed this. Follow us on Twitter at Interaxis8. Info at interaxis.io is a website, and we'll see you in the next video.